Welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Paul Bolte. I'm the Executive Vice President with Trustbridge Global Foundation. And our webinar today is a 45-minute webinar. And so you will have opportunity for questions as we get towards the end. So please type those in the question and answer section, and we'll be answering those for you as we get towards the end. So our webinar today is Giving Internationally, because generosity has no borders. Our panelists for today are our CEO, Bob Collins, and our Vice President of Philanthropy and Giver Services, Tricia Collins. Now, before anyone asks, yes, they are married. So it's probably worth knowing that before we get started. And so I'm going to invite Bob to share with us, and then we'll invite Tricia. Bob, please go ahead.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody. Really excited to have this webinar. We'll start off just by talking a little bit about what Trustbridge is all about, our mission and our vision. So our mission is to mobilize resources by making global giving easy so that charities everywhere have all they need to accomplish their mission. And so part of our theory is that right now, cross-border giving is difficult and expensive. And so a lot of people just give up and they just don't give when it comes to cross-border giving. And if we make it easy, then more money will flow to the areas of the world that need it the most, and charities everywhere will have all they need to accomplish their mission. And it seems to be working. So, and part of this is building out this global network. So we have 14 network members now that comprise 8 billion in assets and 50,000 donors and 70,000 charities all over the world. And we're continuing to build that network, and God willing, we will be, having 50 or 100 network members in the coming years. You can see here our network members, some notable ones: Stewardship in the UK, Intrust in Australia, CNCF in Canada, National Christian Foundation in the United States, and others. So this is these are serving as on-ramps and off-ramps to the global network. So for instance, if you're in the UK, the money would come in through Stewardship and go out through Stewardship for UK donors. So I'm highlighting here just 4 of the things that we do. We actually do more than this, but number 1 is we offer what we call foundation funds, donor advised funds. We also offer fiscal sponsorship. That's a way to give tax-deductible money to non-charitable recipients. It could be businesses that are running some sort of charitable program, or charities that have not yet gotten their charitable status. Non-cash giving is very important. So we can talk about that in more detail in another webinar, but basically you can give anything of value to charity. It could be a business interest. It could be publicly traded shares, a life insurance policy, and all of that can be liquidated and given to charity. And then finally, international grants, which we'll dive into in more detail in just a second. So just drilling in a little bit on the Foundation Fund, Donor Advised Fund. A lot of people aren't that familiar with donor advised funds, so I'll just explain it very quickly. And that is, donor advised fund is like a charitable account within a larger foundation, in our case, Trustbridge Global. So when you set up your fund, when you put money into the fund, you get an immediate tax deduction. The money can be invested and grow tax-free within the foundation fund, but you're still calling the shots and advising grants to your favorite charities. So this is not about a foundation that gets control of your money. From that perspective, you're still directing the giving. And as you can see here, it doesn't cost anything to set it up. The ongoing annual costs are quite low. And a lot of people are interested in Trustbridge as the donor advised fund provider because we are in Switzerland, and there's certainly some advantages to holding assets in Switzerland. Obviously some things like safety and stability, but also it's a great place from which to fund giving all over the world. So you can see here the action steps. Really just get in touch with us and we can walk you through everything.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate you sharing a little bit about the 4 major areas that TrustBridge actually serves clients. But the main thing that we want to talk about today is international grants. And there is no one better to share on this than the person that actually does it all. And that's our VP of Philanthropy, Tricia Collins. So Tricia, over to you.
Great, thanks, Paul. So the thing that we are most known for, or what people usually come to us for, and where our niche really is this international granting space. Before we talk about how it works, I think it's important to talk about the why. Before TrustBridge started, we knew that there were a lot of really generous people that wanted to give internationally, but didn't know how, or were doing it wrong, and people that didn't want to take on the risk, the potential expenses, the lack of security that comes from moving money across borders. And so that's really what we initially set out to solve for. We said, how do we make this less risky, more compliant, and allow people to kind of live out this call of generosity to do international work from their home country and allow money to flow across borders. So the main problem we see donors encountering is the problem of cost and compliance. It tends to be very expensive depending where you are, to be able to be in compliance and still do the generous things that you want to do. And accessibility to good information on the legality of a charity to receive money from foreign sources is actually quite important. You want to avoid, obviously, things like terrorist funding and money laundering issues and things like that. And from most countries, it's actually quite difficult to send money across borders because of the needs for those things, the KYC, the diligence on charity, and secure money transfers. So in most cases, giving to international charities from your home country requires kind of expensive structures to allow for not only just the tax benefit, but also to ensure the compliance with the charity regulations. And I have to say that many donors, including churches, are giving directly in ways that could actually create problems for themselves. And we are trying to stand in the gap for that, to create a better environment for living out that generosity call when work is being done outside of the home countries. So how does it work? As we have discussed, as Bob was talking about, we have this network of global foundations that serve as what I call on-ramps for donors and that partner with TrustBridge to help us vet international organizations. It's always great to have an on-the-ground foundation that knows a lot of these charities. And when you, as a donor, want to give, all you have to do is connect us with that charity contact of the organization that you want to support. And then we walk them through an application process for what we call a charity fund. Bob was talking about foundation funds. Those are made for donors, and charity funds are made for charities. And those charity funds acts as kind of a bucket, an aggregate for donors all around the world to give into to support that particular charity. And once we have that approved charity fund in place, donors can just keep giving into it, and we allow the charities to set the pace and the tone of the distributions that they get, because they understand their own context and the way banking works in their location. And it's super donor friendly, and we provide the charities and the donors with all the things that they need throughout the process to really understand how things move. So from a donor point of view, it's actually quite simple. As a giver, you're making a recommendation to us for an international organization. We work with them to verify that they can legally receive money from international sources. We're looking at things like their structure. We look at sanctions lists to make sure that the people involved in the organization itself are not sanctioned. We look at banking legitimacy, financial data, and we want to make sure that we can safely send grants to those organizations. And we also want there to be as much impact as possible. And often the costs of these kind of traditional structures that people use individually, less money gets to the actual charity. And our team handles all of this for you as a giver. And we keep you informed through the process. And we let you know when a charity is approved. And we try to make it as seamless as possible. The other thing that I like to note is, as a giver, you're living out this kind of generosity call in your own life, But these charity funds end up being extremely helpful to the charities just by your recommendation. Because of this thing called a charity fund, that makes the world a little more open to the charity. And so your recommendation as a giver also opens up the world to the charity in order to have other givers give to them. So this thing called a charity fund ends up being extremely valuable to them as an organization as well. In terms of cost, we do our verifications on a charity and set up this charity fund for a ridiculously low amount. It's 150 Swiss franc equivalent, depending on where they're located. And we review them every year at the same cost. We do not assess for contributions in most countries. But when a grant is requested from a charity, we do assess 1%, subject to a Swiss franc 300 minimum, and the cost of processing a wire is 25 francs for us. So hopefully that's an easy to understand solution that has many benefits for you as a donor. You can rely on our team to create an environment where you can feel secure and assured that all of the pieces are in place for you to support the organizations that are doing the work that's important to you. And really our great desire is that, just what Bob said, more resources are released and flowing to those people on the ground who are doing all that great work around the world. And we are just trying to remove the barriers so that your generosity can flow. It's important. And we want to help in any way we can. So we are continuing to kind of streamline, find best practices, find ways to innovate, to create a safe, easy, fast, and effective system for you and the charities that we serve because of you.
Okay, well, thank you, Tricia. We appreciate you sharing about international granting, and I'm sure that people are starting to think about questions. So please start to use the question and answer box to start to ask some of your questions. We'll have time for that towards the end. But it's my pleasure now to actually introduce a guest. And our guest today is Carl Thong. Carl is coming to us from Singapore. He's the co-founder of the JCEN Foundation. He'll explain a little bit about what that is. But that's actually a foundation fund with TrustBridge. And so, Carl, I'm just going to ask you a few questions, if that's okay. Tell me, why did you even open a fund with TrustBridge?
Thank you, Paul. I mean, originally living in Singapore, we've got several charities here that we can contribute to. In addition to contributing to our church, there's a couple local charities. And my wife and I always think, Singapore is a really rich country. We should be looking outside Singapore. Then it stops there because it's very difficult to find ways to send money over to different countries. So when I learned about TrustBridge, I said, this is brilliant. Let's get it set up. It was really fast, really easy. And what it allowed us to do is allowed us to start to shift our own family thinking of, okay, being a transactional giver, saying, okay, this charity needs to, we can think a little bit more strategically. So our world of giving internationally expanded. We had new reference points, and it allowed us, the Giving Space, which is the portal you guys have, it allowed us to start to reference and really think through and pray about where do we want to give, who do we want to give, and how do we go about giving. So that's really it. It actually allows us to have a broader horizon and reference points. So in the past 18 months since we set this up, we've given to a group of coffee farmers in Africa who's trying to improve crop yield. It's a nonprofit organization with foreign workers there helping look at the science of better farming techniques, all the way to helping with an orphanage, all the way to a venture capital firm that specializes in impact investing, anti-human trafficking, anti-malaria type interventions. So, wow, from impact investing through a venture capital firm to coffee farmers in Africa, our horizons has dramatically expanded. So we've increased our giving because of this, because we're not stopping what we're giving in Singapore, but now we're also expanding. And it's quite exciting, Paul, because we're learning more and more, and we're educating ourselves about this whole process.
Now, you mentioned that you have sort of started this with your family. Talk me through a little bit more about what that's been like. How have you involved the family? It's not just you. So talk us through that.
Sure. I mean, the co-founder, so Jessie, my wife, and I started the foundation. So JCEN stands for Jesse, Carl, myself. Got to put the wife's name first, of course. Ethan, which is my son, and Natalie. So I've got teenage kids, so I think it's a little bit difficult to engage them in giving strategies at the moment, although they know that their parents do give. But with my wife and I, we felt very strongly that this is a family culture that we would like to start to inculcate. So we decide on the giving. We've been assured by Tricia that at the right moment in time and when they're of age, we can bring our two children into the same foundation and they can participate in the decision making. But what this has done, Paul, is actually forced myself and my wife to think, okay, why do we give? The question that Tricia was, who would we like to give to? And what are the values that we want to adhere to as we give? So to communicate with our children, it's very difficult to talk about this over a dinner. So we made a website. So we have a website now, and the kids now, and that kind of institutionalizes our family thinking. And of course, the website can be updated. So that's how we've tried to get the family involved. So my wife and I are primarily driving this at this moment, but I think in a couple of years, we'll be very excited to start to get our kids more involved in the decision making of who to give to and how we'll go about doing that.
Carl, you're amazing. I don't know anyone that's set up a family foundation website. That's awesome. That's great to hear. So as you've actually gone through this process, what's it been like to actually set up? What are the systems like? Have you logged on to your fund? Have you looked at the Giving Space platform? What have you actually experienced?
I literally just logged in like a couple hours before this webinar to make sure it's working. And it is. And it's working. But I actually logged in for another reason. Recently at a corporate event, which I was giving a seminar. They wanted to pay me a kind of a speaking gift. And I said, why don't you actually, instead of giving it to me, give it to our family foundation? And that's exactly what they did. The host of the seminar, processed this, put the website link on, had their Visa card, MasterCard, process it. And I just was able to say, hey, wait a minute. Even in the marketplace, in the corporate setting, people can contribute to the foundation. And my wife and I have the privilege of actually then steering where the funds go. It's not a lot at this moment from this corporate, and we don't anticipate that there will be a big influx. It's primarily still a vehicle for my family's assets to be rolled in to the foundation. So, yeah, I mean, we log in very easily. It's a website. The numbers are very clear. And it's good to see that the technology is working well. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thanks for sharing, Carl. So as we close our time together, is there anything else that you think would be relevant to share with people that are going through the same experience that you've been through, that are looking to set up their own fund, potentially in Switzerland? Why in Switzerland? What other advice could you give people?
Well, I think we're all kind of maturing in different paces, and we're all kind of being pulled to many different directions. If you have the ability to give, and I would like to think most people have some form of ability to give. But for me, there's like 3 anchor points. First is, if I want to start to shift from giving transactionally and on an ad hoc basis and being a bit more strategic about it, I think setting up a foundation through TrustBridge is the right move, because it actually forces the discipline. The second thing is partnerships. I think earlier on it was Bob who mentioned about the different partnerships around the world. So this gentleman in Australia, who's your partner, who's TrustBridge partner in Australia and Trust, was talking about this initiative that they're working on. They're quite excited about it, and they're raising money for it. And I was at the dinner table with them, and they were saying, I thought, what is it all about? It's about helping a community of coffee farmers improve their livelihoods. So wait a minute, I want to participate in that. And that's exactly what we did. Went back home, logged on, click, click, and that instantly happened, right? So it's just like easy as organizing it. So I think from a transactional to a strategic intent in giving, I think having partnerships, global partnerships, allows a broader reference point. And the third thing is actually an opportunity to create awareness and hopefully legacy and culture with my own family. I mean,
Thanks.
I always say the best sermons are not heard; they're seen. And so my wife and I should be actually practicing what we are trying to preach.
Well, Carl, we really appreciate you sharing today. Thank you for your perspective. And we hope that everyone on the call has found it very, very helpful. So let me just give you a little bit of a background on where we've come from. Like, TrustBridge has been in operation since 2017. And many people have heard of us, but really don't know too much about us. And so I'll just give you a little bit of a history story. When we first started, in our first year, we did 4 million in cross-border granting. But to date, we've taken in over $500 million US, and we've granted out $300 million to 91 different countries. It's about 3,500 plus different grants in that time frame. So it's quite significant. And we've fast become the place that people are using to do cross-border granting. So we're delighted to be able to share with you today. I mean, just here in this last year, we're continuing to develop and grow what we provide to our clients. A couple of key new tools that we provided this year. The first one is our new platform called Giving Space. You can find this on our website just by purely clicking on Explore Charities in the top right-hand corner of trustbridgeglobal.com, or you can go directly to this URL, which is givingspace.trustbridgeglobal.com. But essentially, this is a list of all of our vetted charities. The verified charities that Tricia talked about are able to upload a profile, tell the world about who they are. You can read about them, and you can literally just click on that give link, and no matter where you are in the world, it will channel you through to the right country. You'll be able to give locally if it's one of those countries that can issue a tax receipt. You'll be issued the tax receipt, and you've just given to that charity. You'll also see that these charities have some projects on there where they're raising specific amounts of money for a specific project, and you might choose to fund that as well. So we're delighted to be able to bring this new platform to the global generosity space. And we see in the future, this will be a place where donors will be able to come find fully verified and vetted charities from all over the world. And so we encourage you to check it out and take a look at it. The second thing that we've introduced this year is for those folks who live in the United Kingdom, who are US citizens. It's one of those rare situations where you've got the ability to be able to actually give to an organization and actually claim a tax benefit in both the UK and in the US, because our UK entity is a subsidiary of our US entity. So if you fit into that category, come to our website. It'll talk about dual taxpayers. We'd love to hear from you. It is coming towards the end of the year. If that's something that you'd like to do, we can still make that happen this year. And for those who are listening on the call outside of the UK, who are looking at doing things, there is still time to get things done to the end of the year. If you want to get money to a charity overseas, we're getting close. I can see Tricia is starting to shake as I mention this, but it's still possible. I mean, how long does it take us to actually verify these charities? I'm not going to put any specific time frame on it, but if you asked us to move quickly, it can be done in under a couple of days. It doesn't take long to get these verified. So if you're still thinking about making grants this year, then please go ahead and do that. So as we move to our next section, we're going to move into a question answer section. And so I know that some people have been asking questions on the platform. So I'm going to bring those questions and I'll let our panelists answer these questions. I might determine who's going to answer it, or you might just determine yourself. So the first question is, are you able to deploy capital, and I'm assuming they're meaning charitable capital, to war zones like the Ukraine theater? So who would like to answer that question?
That would be me. Yes, we can. So long as the organization that you are wanting to support is structured as a charity in that place, and that country is not currently sanctioned. So for a while, Russia was open, but now it's sanctioned, so we can't send money to Russia, but Ukraine is not sanctioned. And so as long as the charity exists in the Ukrainian jurisdiction and they have, a bank account that we can verify and a structure that we can verify, then yes, we can. And actually we do. We have quite a few Ukrainian charities. So we do it quite a bit, and we're constantly kind of scanning the environment for new sanctions on different places. And the list is probably 10 countries right now that we cannot send to. But those kind of open up and close, countries, it changes quite a bit from time to time. So we're kind of watching, and when new things happen, we try to keep that pretty up to date. But yes, right now we can get money to Ukraine.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. So let's just keep going on with our questions here. I think I can answer this one. Can you share the slide deck after? Yes, we can do that. And what is the minimum needed to establish a foundation fund or a donor advised fund? So Bob, I'll let you answer that question. What's the minimum they need to establish it?
Yeah, we actually intentionally did not set a minimum amount to contribute. We do have a minimum monthly charge on the foundation fund. If you remember back from that slide, we charge 30 basis points a year, or 0.3% per year, but that is subject to a minimum of 30 Swiss francs per month. So if you only put in a few $100s or francs or euro, that fee is going to be fairly high. So I would say as a practical minimum, be thinking about $10,000 or francs or euro equivalent.
Okay, thanks. Tricia, next question is going to come to you. And I'm not sure who mentioned that churches give internationally. I think it was you. And any idea on the scale of that generosity and the portion of it which may be out of compliance? And then a related question is, what are your ideas on how to engage those churches in TrustBridge's solution?
Yeah, I mean, as a church, congregation member, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, our church supported this international group. And you just are like, great, that's great. But how they're doing it actually matters. And churches often, to the scale, I can't speak to scale, but churches do a lot of international support, but a lot of times they're just doing it wrong. They're sending money, Western Union, or they're just wiring money without the actual legal compliant pieces being there. And I get calls quite often from churches who say, oh, we've been supporting, I don't know, an anti-trafficking ministry in Hong Kong, and we've just been sending them wires. And in a US context, that's problematic because there's this thing called equivalency that they're supposed to engage in order to make sure that that charity would be considered a US charity under our rules, under a 501c3 paradigm, but they're just not doing it. They're not engaging, mostly because they don't know that they should. And then you're putting quite a bit of, taking on quite a bit of risk as a church, because they're probably not doing a lot of diligence. They just met somebody, they like the ministry, and they're just sending the money. So it's out of compliance, and it's probably quite risky because they're not actually conducting the diligence. So when you hear of that as a member of a church, it doesn't hurt to ask the questions and say, hey, well, how are we getting money to those things? And are we making sure that there's not terrorist funding? And are we, checking for money laundering and things like that? A church will be like, what are you talking about? And if they are not, then that's a lot of times how we get connected, is because someone in the church has said, I know our church is doing this wrong and in a really risky way. So can we engage with you? And of course we can. So, churches, ministry people in general don't love paperwork and compliance things. So we just say, when you hear about it, check and, kind of connect them with us if you feel like, there's a need to be more in compliance and a little bit safer and making sure that the money is doing what it's supposed to do. It's an interesting question, the scale of generosity. I mean, I see, just because I watch a lot of the donors that give to our international charities, and a high percentage of them are churches. So I think churches are generally very generous, and a lot of them do use us.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, the second part of the question was, what are your ideas on how to engage those churches in the TrustBridge solution? And maybe I can answer some of that myself. And that is, I mean, TrustBridge is a reasonably new organization. Not many people know about us. So everyone on the call, you can definitely help us by just talking to your local churches and referring people to us. The more people that get to hear about TrustBridge and that they understand that they're probably not being compliant. I can't tell you how many people I speak to on a weekly basis that go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize all this. And so for an organization like ours to come along and say, look, we're going to solve that problem for you and take away all that pain and all the compliance issues and the cost issues that go with it, it just makes it so much easier for them to be able to do that. So next question, Carl, is kind of come to you. From a funder or a giver's point of view, what would you like to see on an organization's profile? So I'm assuming we're talking about on Giving Space here. What draws you in? So when you're looking at a charity's profile, what grabs your heart, your interest? What do they need to put on it?
This is something my wife and I actually intentionally have spoken about, and we try to be quite consistent. First is impact, and we're talking about human impact. So if there is a decision between charity A and charity B, and charity A is talking about, helping young kids get an education versus a rainforest save the trees, we would lean towards human impact. That's the first thing. The second thing is we like to know what is the measurement of success. We typically ask that question. We like to ask the organizations we provide, can you just share with us, how do you measure success? We're not questioning the measurement, we just want to know how. And the third thing is actually from an individual point of view is, apart from ourselves, who else are contributing to this charity? So those are typically the kind of things that I like to see. We've also actually sent some of these charities, because we've heard about them but we don't know much, over to Tricia and her team, and they've done the verifications for us. So we're very grateful for that. And we've continued to actually participate in giving to those charities that's now on Giving Space.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing.
So, Paul, if you don't mind, let me interrupt.
Sure.
So, Carl, while we're talking to you, I just also wanted to ask the question. We touched on this briefly before, but you have made impact investments through your fund at TrustBridge. Could you talk a little bit more about that, how it worked, and what was your experience?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Charities, oftentimes when we donate, but there is one opportunity which is called Eagle Venture Fund. They are basically a venture capital. They provide venture capital returns, but they only invest in companies that have a commercial upside potential to it. We've made a 20-25% return in the past 18 months investing in this venture capital firm, and all the money that we earn through this investment goes back into our foundation in TrustBridge. So there's an amplification opportunity there. So I can tell you, in Singapore and Asia, that would not be an option that's available at the moment. And Bob, we're going to work hard to try to change that. But yeah, so sometimes we give because that's charitable giving, philanthropy. But in this specific instance, we have been able to make an investment in a venture capital firm called Eagle Venture. I'm very happy to kind of answer any questions about that on an offline basis.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Tricia, next question is coming to you. In fact, the next two questions are coming to you. First one's really quick and simple. Can I make a donation to an individual overseas?
That depends. That's a maybe answer. To the extent that an individual is connected to a charitable organization, yes. In most jurisdictions, everyone that we work in, money to an individual is not an allowable or tax deductible often giving opportunity. You can give to a pastor, but you're giving to the church of that pastor. You're not giving to the pastor directly. There are a few exceptions to that, but they're really rare. One place that it is possible to do this is in the UK. We have a program called the UK Christian Workers. It's for full-time ministry people that are connected to the UK. Either they're living and working in the UK, or they are UK residents living and working in other places that are doing ministry work. So that's why I say it's kind of a maybe. Generally, it's disallowed, but there are a lot of sending organizations that work, like Friends International and some other missionary sending agencies, where if the person is connected to that agency, then the agency itself we can send money to the agency and the agency can support the person. So there are ways to do it. Sometimes you have to be a little bit creative or make sure that they're connected in the right ways to be able to do it. But generally I can't just send money to Paul Bolte and say, here you go.
Come on, please.
Here you go. Have some charitable capital to pay your bills. But if you ever have a question about that, I'm certainly happy to talk about it, because it does matter kind of what they're doing, who they're connected to, and where they're operating.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Okay, next question. Back to you again, Tricia, is how are charities verified by TrustBridge? And I'm going to give you a bit more context here. We understand the organization needs to be registered with the country and they need to fill in an application online. What other checks or procedures does TrustBridge use?
Sure. That application that we use it's an interesting application, actually, because what it does is it asks a series of questions that are relevant to all of the places where we have network members. So we're looking at like initial governing documents. How was the charity structured? Who are the people involved? Who's the leadership? Who's the board? We use a third-party provider to check all of those people against sanctions lists around the world. We look at what is their plan for dissolution. There has to be a very specific type of plan for winding up a charity. Charitable money always has to stay charitable. So we're looking for things like that. We look at financial data. We usually take 3 years of financial data, either historical or projections on a new charity, to make sure that they have some transparency and accountability. And then we look at the charitable mandate, like what kind of work are they doing, and does it align with the charitable mandates of our foundations and the network on the whole. There are also some pieces of that where we're looking at, or they're asking the charity to make attestations of the way that they safeguard vulnerable populations. If you're working with children, do you safeguard them? And what are your policies around that? If you have an anti-corruption policy. It's a whole set of questions and analyses that say, okay, is this a legal, safe, accountable charity, and can we give to them?
Just a side question to that. So it sounds like you're doing what I'll call legal due diligence. What about qualitative due diligence? Are you helping the donor tell us if that charity is good at what they do or not?
No, we can. That's a kind of a side conversation, but what we're really looking at is this organization legally sound? Like, can we send money cross borders to them? In places like India, there is a piece called the FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, and they have to have that very specific piece in order to even legally receive money from a foreign source into India. And so we look at all of those things, and there are some jurisdictional specificities around that, and we're pretty well aware of what those are. So we're making sure that it doesn't just meet like a legal Swiss requirement, which is where our grants initiate from, but does it work for the network? Does it, if it's a UK charity, is stewardship our UK partner, would they approve them? And if it's in a place where there is a really specific type of requirement, like in India, where there's an FCRA rule, do they meet that? But no, we're not necessarily looking at, like necessarily the quality of the work that they're doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We've now come pretty much to the close of our time. So thank you to Bob Collins for sharing. Thank you to Tricia Collins and to Carl Thong for sharing today. We really appreciate your time. And if you want to know how to get hold of us, here's our email address. It's info@trustbridgeglobal.com. And yes, we all get to see that. So you can get to any one of us. You can even write Dear Tricia and put info at, or Dear Paul, info at. I'm probably the first person that you would talk to if it's a new relationship. And so feel free to reach out directly to us. It's been our absolute pleasure today to share with you about international granting. We hope that you found the time helpful. We hope that you have seen part of the vision that we see about what it means to be able to make a difference globally, to be able to help charities, literally to be able to fund all the things they want to fund, to be able to achieve all the things that a charity wants to achieve. So TrustBridge purely exists to mobilize resources by making global giving easy so that charities everywhere can have all they need to accomplish their mission. So thank you for sharing and thank you for joining us.